temperament and that discipline to do that. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I know what you mean. I had May Pang on the show, and she described Yoko. She was hesitant to get into it. But she described Yoko.
Heard that show, Ed, yeah.
Oh, you did? Yeah. So she described Yoko as being a witch, Did you listen to my shows with A.J. Weberman, too? Because I've known him since I was 17 years old, and he used to hang out with John and Yoko in the Dakota.
I could have. You hear so many shows, but I know the May Pang one very well because I was quite interested in it when I was listening, when I was researching stuff on the book. But there's questions over. I've come across a number of people from their early career, people they met in Germany, up to people that they knew after after the Beatles split, all who seem to have been connected somewhat with witchcraft, black magic,
right,
things like this. But again, I think it's there's people are. Marianne Faithfull, who was obviously around in the '60s, girlfriend of Mick Jagger, and also had a bit of a pop career. Herself and Brian Jones's girlfriend, Anita Pallenberg. They were like, at least on some superficial level, interested in those things, that area, occultism or witchcraft or something. But that was the kind of spirit, as Marianne Faithfull said, that was the spirit of the 60s. You were interested in those things. You were kind of expanding your mind, we were looking beyond. Well, and let's not forget, the church on every level it's an occult brotherhood as well. And I don't mean that as in Jesus Christ or Christ, who's very important for me, particularly in my own life. There's a lot of stuff, and anybody who spends any time reading the Bible can realize that it's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of trying to get to, it is so rich and deep with meaning that I'm sure, and then people have different interpretations of things, and some people don't like it. It's the big problem with Catholics and Protestants here in this country. They don't like each other's interpretations of things, and one person thinks the other is the devil, and so, but they're both drawn from the same source. That is an occult text in the sense that it's an esoteric text. It's full of knowledge beyond what I think, it's the creation of the whole universe is in it.
Yeah, I believe that the Bible is it's living and breathing. It's filled with the Holy Spirit, and you could read the same thing 2 days later, and it'll affect you in a different way. You'll learn something new. This might be a good time. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a living, as Jesus says, you came to me, I would have given you living water. It's living. It's constantly alive. And therefore, I wouldn't like to say we have to adapt it to the times we're living in. But if it becomes the word, when the word gets written down, Johnny Rotten said in one of the songs, the written word is a lie. Because once it becomes written and it becomes stuck, then it in a sense it becomes a lie. Because if it doesn't change, we don't change with it as a living thing. The word, Christ is the word, and the word is something I speak. But once I write it down, then it can become a dogma, and then it can become. And I think sometimes when it becomes a dogma, sometimes and in some senses, we might see that gets into the hands of people who can then use that for their own means. We have to really be awake to that. And I think when you waken up, and I think it's an interesting thing about the Beatles, is I think once they started to wake up to what was going on, then they started to disintegrate because they were very much aware, I think, of, as you said, they had no control. What they were being used by people. They were becoming kind of unhappy in the situation. It was becoming claustrophobic for them. So once you wake up to the situation, and then when you wake up, you realize, which I think, again, the Beatles did, once they had, fame, which they wanted, and Beatlemania, which was great when it came, because it just brought so much joy and excitement and newness to a bunch of kids, who had grown up, or had grown up in the aftermath of the war, and But at the same time, it brought a mania, and it brought people became out of control, and people started to look to people like Lennon and that as some kind of saviors. Which at the end of the day, they're very talented, very interesting, and possibly are conduits for something higher. But they're not the Messiah, So this is a negative aspect to Beatlemania, and. But I think once they realised that fame wasn't exactly what they wanted, once they realised that they had all the money that they could, that they suddenly were making money for lots of people, including themselves to some extent, they started to realise people want them to make money out of them. So the wealth wasn't enough. So then they turned to LSD and to mind expansion, and that wasn't enough because that's a dangerous path to go down in many ways. And then they got into spiritualism and Eastern religion, and I think that awoke in them. And I think again a crisis point in Lennon's life when his life was threatened by that remark he made, they were bigger than Jesus. I think that brought him a greater awareness to this whole idea of Christ and love, and do you know what I mean? So
yeah.
They started to wake up, and I think the culture started to wake up as well. And I think possibly these dark occult forces maybe wanted them to wake up too soon. Maybe wanted them to kind of wake up in such a sense that it was just overwhelming for them. Maybe they on another level, it sounds a bit contradictory. Maybe they didn't want them to wake up. They wanted to kind of destroy them. The culture, because I think it's a very rich culture and a very, very, once you start talking about love in any real sense, which I think the 60s tried to do, it tried to, it didn't succeed, but it tried to. And then you're really shaking the tree of people who don't want a world full of love. It's much more profitable to have wars going on everywhere,
Right. Did you look into Paul's friendship with William S. Burroughs?
Yeah.
What'd you come up with there?
Again, I think that friendship is, it wasn't from what I came across, it wasn't anything of any real depth. Because you have to remember, these guys are off touring a lot, they're in the studio a lot. So their lives are on the road quite a lot of the time. I mean, I know by 67 that had kind of stopped, but up until that time, they were just so busy. And as Lennon said, while everyone else was goofing off during the 60s, they were working 24 hours a day. So I don't think they had really time to kind of to have these very, to build up any kind of real deep relationships. But I think that comes more through McCartney's connection with the Indica Gallery,
right?
Which is an interesting thing. I think people should maybe look more at those things, because the Indica Gallery was a group of people. I'm not sure if your listeners know, but they were, they were writers and artists. Two people, particularly a guy called Robert Fraser, who was a kind of impresario. He was an art dealer. He would very connected with people, and he was friendly with McCartney through a guy called Barry Mills, who was McCartney's biographer actually later on, and that was through Peter Asher, who was friends with Barry Mills, and through Paul was dating his sister, was his fiance, Jane Asher.
Right.
So there was a connection there, and their interest, from what I gather, is they were kind of intellectuals, and at the early 60s, they kind of wanted to bring about a kind of a counterculture that was based on a dream that Carl Jung had, where he saw kind of the new era, the new culture being. He had a dream apparently, and he saw this it was basically this new culture would be in Liverpool. I think he saw it as this kind of counterculture, alternative culture, artist-based culture. But they kind of wanted to be the ones that initiated that. These intellectuals in the Indica, what became the Indica Gallery and Indica Bookstore, and but they wanted it to happen in London. So they kind of promoted that. So here again is a kind of an organic connection between, obviously, Paul meets Jane Asher. Jane Asher is from a family very kind of upper middle class in a way. The father was quite a well-known doctor, I think, and the mother was a music teacher who actually apparently taught George Martin, the Beatles producer, clarinet when he was younger. So it's strange that these connections are still there, and Paul somehow meets them. Jane Asher was an actress, and he met her at some show. They started to go out together. He gets to know the brother well and gets to know. So these links are organic. They're not created by the Tavistock Institution or CIA or MI5 or anything like that. They grow organically, but it just so happens that this person that these people he gets to know have this interest in kind of creating a type of a counterculture. They obviously see the Beatles with they're making an impact globally. So they're kind of excited that they can influence them. They had all these, most of the strange books that they would come across, and people like Burroughs or other avant-garde composers that they would introduce McCartney to. McCartney, I think, particularly was interested in hanging around with these people because he saw it as a way to get, good sources for songs and to get ideas. Very, very clever McCartney in that way. But he doesn't have the fire in the sense that Lennon would have, that kind of just, grit and edginess. So I think he also borrowed these things very much consciously to give himself some kind of, to make himself not seem as quite as boring next to Lennon. And I think Lennon was interested in that. There was fascinating stuff going on. But Lennon very much a person who I think is in his own world and in his own head. And he would spend a lot of time on his own, doing his own thing. And I think he had always done that from a young age. So McCartney was real social guy. He was keeping all these ideas and bring them back to the group. That was his kind of contribution in a kind of, in really becoming an artist rather than just a pop musician or pop singer. Whereas I think Lennon's came more from himself and his things that he was interested in as he had always been as a child, the books that he read and the imagination that he had, and also the quite difficult life that he had, without kind of losing his parents and that kind of thing, which brought us kind of an inner artistic, expression. So I think McCartney's association with Burroughs is really only it's connected to those people, but I don't think it went any deeper than maybe he met him a few times and they shared a kind of some they had chats about certain things, but I don't think it went any further than that. He borrowed some of the techniques from Burroughs when they were using tape loops and stuff like that,
Yeah, the reverse stuff. He said that Burroughs was teaching him how to play stuff in reverse. Now, what about the connection between the Protestant Church of the Final Judgment and the Indica Gallery and McCartney and stuff like that? If there was this kind of an influence, like a thread of this influence, don't you think that they would be capable of pulling that off?
So who is that?
The Protestant Church of the Final Judgment?
Well, can you just tell me what that is? I'm not sure of what that is.
They were connected to the Indica Gallery and also to Burroughs. It's like a cult. It was a large satanic type cult run by the Grimson. They were based originally in London, associated with Charles Manson, associated with the Son of Sam murders over here. You're not familiar with that at all?
I think I came across something to do with that. All right, yeah. For whatever reason, it didn't lead me down any road to investigate. Not that it isn't worthy of it, but I don't know. I'm not so familiar with it, but I think I'm familiar with there's a site called Beatles. The chap goes into that quite a bit. and all these various connections. But I found them to be, and I'm not saying that they are, I found some of them to be a little bit, I didn't find anything really